Land and Open Spaces Committee is being filmed. By being present, either in person or virtually via an online link, attendees are filmed and to the public use of those images and sound recordings. Members of the public will be given an opportunity to speak during the public open sessions, but not at other times. Attendees should not disclose any personal information of individuals, as this would infringe the data protection rights of those individuals. For those attending virtually, please mute your microphones when not speaking. Okay. Welcome then to this meeting. And firstly is apologies, and I have one apology from Councillor Michael North. Do we have any declarations of interest? Okay. Moving on then. Public open session. So we have a period of 15 minutes, members of the public, to ask questions about the agenda. Do we have members of the public who wish to ask questions?
Chair, there wasn't anybody there. So
there are no members of the public present.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then. 4A. The minutes of the last meeting have been already approved, so there's no need to approve them. So can I ask members to receive the approved minutes, and we'll move on to matter 5. Okay, so matters arising from the minutes of the Public Land and Open Spaces Committee meeting on Tuesday, 16th of March, 2021. Which is page 4 in the set. So anything on page 4? Matters arising, no? Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Councillor Fage.
Yeah, item whatever it is, something F, about 6F, the spinny. The asset register. Councillor Mark Foster asked whether we could. What's that, sorry?
sorry, you've still got on the asset register.
I'll take it offline, but no, I haven't received it.
Well, most definitely ensure you get it. That's strange.
Yeah, I would also like to see it because I think it would be really interesting. That was the only thing.
Okay. Anything else on page 7? Councillor Strawn.
Sorry, if we're having an asset register, perhaps all councillors could receive it.
Councillor Mark. Sorry?
Are we doing accuracy on that as well?
We're doing matters arising.
Oh, okay.
The minutes have already been approved. Page 9, we've not got there yet.
Point of order, Chairman.
Sorry?
Point of order. I don't believe the minutes have been approved. They can only be approved by this committee. They were received by council as draft minutes, but they've not yet been approved.
I'm just reading the minute of the members to receive the approved minutes of the Public Land and Open Spaces. They're approved at council. Was that not correct? No?
Well, I was confused. I think we need to do accuracy and then on the horizon.
Okay. In that case, then, start again on page 4. Anything on page 5? Page 6? Page 7? Page 8? Page 9? Okay. Yes, everything was in order then. Okay. Going back then to matters arising.
Point of order, Chairman. Shouldn't we formally approve them now, just because we've got been through?
Oh, of course, I do beg your pardon.
I move they be approved.
Against.
Can we now move on?
Record that, man.
We're now doing matters arising. Okay, page 4. Page 5. Councillor Knight.
Thank you. Now I'm confused. On the item 6B on the public ground depot, I just wondered if the clerk or the team had any updates in terms of the ideas for how we would use that depot, benefit the community, and what the timeline was for vacating it and considering those ideas.
Okay, we'll do the timeline first. Jonathan, would you like us to clarify when? I know we've started to move the equipment, but when all of the equipment will be back in the new?
I would think a couple of weeks. We've already got most of the equipment up there. We've still got a little bit of work to do within the building, but all the electrics are in right the way through. All the lighting systems, like inside and out, the alarms set, and all up and running, and all the computer hub and wireless hub is in there. It's just waiting for the landline to go into it. So we've got a few little things that still need doing. There's a workshop for our maintenance guy that'll be moving out of Drove Road Cemetery Chapel, and then that's about it. That's done then. Really, the hard standing out the back, and we've got a kitchenette to put into the mess rooms for the guys to have meals and everything when they're there. So
Perhaps I could add to that. So Jonathan took the opportunity of taking the chair around the other day, and I've also had a look around. It's nice to see our equipment in situ, really good. The electrical works look very, very impressive and have been done very speedily, so I was very impressed with that. We have had some internal conversations around what we might do with the old building.
yeah, the PS.
This is hold for a minute. Yeah, sorry. There is one option on the table. Yeah. What we have not yet done, so we'll talk about the detail in a moment, is to get a commercial surveyor to ascertain in proper sense of the value of the property to whoever might be interested in taking it on. But we have already had an expression of interest. Yep. I think, bearing in mind that we're in open session, we have had an expression of interest.
Yeah.
They are keen to take the building on. They have given us an estimate of what they believe the building to be worth. Yep. And I think it's not unreasonable, but I think it's something that we need to check and validate with a commercial
Get about proper valuation on the both places.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything more on page 5? Page 6. Councillor Knight.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that Amy Larson's look magnificent on item C. So thank you for organising those. Just like the blue music, really impressive.
Okay, that's very good to hear. I'm hoping that members have also noticed the entry point coming in from the retail park. And I was very, very pleased to see that Jonathan has designed a nice yes, it takes a little bit of growing, a little bit of watering, but we can see that it's there, can't we?
It's just got to wait for the colours to come out. Really, the yellow crayon you can see instantly. The blue stripes for the St Andrew's Cross not quite as visible, but it's coming in the red outside. So I think it'll look good. They're all the same height, the plants, or should be, but you can just keep them trimmed in situ and should look a flourishing something. I won't be able to do that quite with the winter bedding because that's a lot more difficult than to get a pattern like that. You've got much more variety in the summer bedding, but yeah, so.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on page 6?
Perhaps I could do a quick 30-second update on the spinning, perhaps, just to say that the Deputy Public Ground Manager will be looking, I think, in the early part of the autumn to plant the new trees. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that obviously elements of the community will be supporting that, particularly the Scouts Association. I did have representation from some people of the local residents last week, and I talked to them about what our plans were. I have to say that there is still some discomfort about what happened, but hopefully that the new trees will partly remedy that.
Okay, page 7. Gone then to page 8.
I just think I ought to mention, seeing as you mentioned the Scouts, I have an non-pecuniary interest with the Scouts, obviously, as the district commissioner for the local Scouts. I know nothing about this. I assume it's with the local groups, but just thought I ought to mention that. So we can read.
Okay. Page 8 then.
Can I just mention something about Magnolia Place?
Sure, please do.
We are in ongoing discussions with the representatives of the people who live near Magnolia Place, the legal representatives of those, to ensure that the work that was taking place has totally alleviated the issues that were raised at the time. And it may be that some additional work might be required.
Retreatment of the sewage.
Yeah, watch this space and we'll see what happens.
Anything else on page 8? In that case, we move back to the agenda. And it's items of consideration, item 6A, Jubilee Recreation Area. You'll be aware of a report that I circulated some time ago, and a copy is also attached to this agenda set. There's not a great deal I can add to my report, but I'd be interested to hear any comments from the floor on the matter. Councillor Knight.
Okay, thank you. So I live a couple of minutes away from the recreation area. Thank you for the report. I live on Mountbatten Drive. So I see how the recreation area is used on an almost daily basis. I broadly support the recommendations in the Boston's report, so I'll be very happy to propose those recommendations, but I'd like to propose some comments if I may. So I think at least some of the fence on the north side, that's the fence between the Elway and Bloor Estate and Sandy View should remain, because the end of the Jubilee Recreation area nearest that fence is regularly used for ball games, and on the new estate, really, there's nowhere suitable for ball games. And often people play football towards the fence, and the fence stops the footballs. But I think it would make good sense to add a gap or a gate in that fence to allow traffic through. I think we need to consider whether that's all traffic, people on bikes, or whether it's just people on foot. I think the footpath on the new estate, which is currently a weaving, meandering footpath that stops right in the middle of the fence, just behind a tree, needs to be moved. Because at the moment, I think it needs to take away a tree, that would be a sad loss, but also I think it would be disruptive to the use of the play area if a footpath went straight through the middle there. So I would suggest that path needs to be moved towards the east side, where there's currently a footpath running the length of the recreation area. Secondly, I think I mentioned it before, I'd like to see consideration given to that, something like a dog training area at the south end of the field. Many people in the town have dogs, not everyone has a good space to allow their dogs to exercise or maybe to be trained off the lead, so that may be something to consider. I think it's essential that we consult with the people living around the Jubilee area, especially those in the Sandy View bungalows. And of course, I recall the last time we discussed this at the Common Ground Open Spaces meeting on the 18th of February 2020, and there were a number of actions coming out of that meeting, which I suspect may not have been followed up on, if I stand to be corrected. So the sense of that meeting was that this committee felt that it was necessary to have a holistic conversation with the developer, the lead developer in Belway, and the management company, Crabtree Management, to the estate, and to discuss the possible adoption of the joint play area and to look at a holistic strategy for how we can work with them. And I think that is something that we must follow up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Pullinger, you live up there. I'm surprised that you don't have a contribution.
Oh, I do. I was just, I saw Councillor Storm had his hand up. So I was,
On first.
Sorry, not hiding. Noting the recommendations, the other part that I think we ought to be doing is looking at the actual planning permission for the new development and any agreements that there were with regard to footways, etc. My concern is when one looks at the plan, the footpath finishes short of the boundary fence. It would look like a classic ransom strip if one was looking at a development on our side of that piece of land, which of course we're not looking at that on the Jubilee Recreation Ground. But I think we just need to be wary of what the actual conditions are, because I can see the developers might be trying to seek something a little bit extra out of it, and I'd like to know exactly what their obligations were with regard to the extent of that pathway before we start negotiating, so we know where we stand, and that I think would entail discussing that with Central Beds.
I think the paper really is the start of a conversation more than anything else. It's and obviously those sort of things would be looked at. Obviously. Anyone else? Councillor Pullinger.
thank you. So, firstly, I think I agree with some of what Councillor Strawn said in terms of it being important to look at the original planning permission. I think when I last looked and tried to find information, and it's very difficult with these planning applications that are quite old and go through multiple changes as different conditions of discharge, etc. But it showed actually that the footpath didn't even continue from Gale Drive down through that green area, that it stopped at Gale Drive. So it would definitely be important to sort of understand what the original requirement was there. I think I'm certainly in favour of opening up that fence, as like Councillor Nat, I live nearby. I actually live on the land north of Potton Road Estate at the other end of it. But a few thoughts that I had. I think the consultation with local residents is key to this, and that's a mixture of the residents that live on the new estate, the residents that live on Mountbatten Drive in that area, particularly the ones on Sandy View. Councillor Knight made a good point around should it be open to cyclists or just pedestrians. I think even if the intent is for it to only be for people on foot, people are going to cycle through there anyway, and already do cycle around that area anyway. But we should be aware that particularly the path down Sandy View down to Potton Road is quite narrow, so if you've got pedestrians on there and cyclists as well, then if we were going to open it to cyclists, I think there's probably space there to widen that footpath. There's quite a bit of green space on the side. In terms of how much of the fence to open, I think it should be a smaller opening for some of the reasons Councillor Knight said, but also I think I think it's good to open up and have access between the different areas, but I think it will encourage people to just walk straight off the field out in front of the people's houses that are on the other side as well. So I don't think it would be right to just have the whole field open. And then in terms of the route for the path, again, I think we need to look at how the field's going to be used as sort of a wider scheme and before we fix on what we're going to do. So I think there's some really good ideas in here in terms of the proposals. It would be nice to have some more planting of trees and bushes and whatever in the right places, but at the same time we need to make sure we maintain it as an area where people can be active and play ball games and things like that. So yeah, making the path near the edge I think would be preferable rather than going straight through the middle of the field. But I think ultimately, I think it would be good for the residents of that area to make improvements to the field. It's very undulating as well at the moment, so some form of scheme to flatten it off and take out the worst of the rivets, as it were, in the field would also be very beneficial for the residents.
Okay. Councillor Mark Foster.
I'm pretty broadly in agreement with the comments that have been made already. I think we've got a couple of things that, in addition, that I'd like to comment on in terms of the offence. I mean, I understand sort of the views about having it too narrow, having a narrow on wider gap. I think that's something that, as a part of the initial conversation, we're broadly in agreement that we should open it up in some way. It's whether that's the whole thing or half of it or a section. I think will part of the next part of the conversation. My own personal view is that whilst I understand Councillor Knight's view on the dog recreation area as such, I can't say I fully support that. But certainly it's something I think as part of the whole process we should be making consideration for how that whole space can be used. So I wouldn't say we should rule it out or rule it in, but certainly consider the whole thing. I think it would be a shame to have the pathway completely moved against the existing pathway. I think there needs to be some form of link into the pathway that's there already, whether it meanders to a shorter degree, so it doesn't go right the way through the middle of the field. But I think there needs to be an element of it to sort of maintain the continuity, really. But again, this should form part of the whole plan with what we're trying to do. I think there might be some mileage with having the conversations with the management company and the developers in terms of what options we've got. So if we have a clear plan, a clear design that we're looking to do as part of a discussion with those two organisations, it might be that we can. There's some building that perhaps they could take care of the work that might be done in exchange for something else. So just some sort of commercial arrangement that could be considered as part of the plan there. And I think also the town clerk really should be looking at options around financing this work. So whether it's through Section 106, whether it's through community grants. And Peter, I know I'm probably stating the obvious here, but I know that's something that you would be considering anyway. But I think also we really need to make sure we've got a plan or an idea that what we want to go forward with before we start consulting with residents, because it then becomes if you've got no clear idea about what you want to do, you can't consult on anything. I think we need to have a clear idea about what we'd like to do and then take the feedback rather than what would you like to see, because I think that then opens up lots of different options. You'll get the feedback anyway, but I think it's important we're doing have the conversation with the residents. So I think broadly we're in agreement. So I think Councillor Light has sort of suggested a proposal. I think my proposal would be pretty much in line with that, with perhaps slightly different wording, but happy to hear what others have to say.
Second, Councillor Knight's proposal.
Okay, can we reiterate the proposal then for the sake of the minute taker?
Oh, that's going to be tough. Okay, I'll go. So to broadly endorse the recommendations of the report, but noting the emphasis on consultation with residents both sides, consideration with regard to how much of the fence will open up and how the pathway may continue. A plan is needed for how the area will be used, and to summarize discussions with the developer and the management company of the new estate.
All those in favour? That's unanimous. Anyone against? That is carried. Thank you, Councillor Light. Next item then is the deputy, which is 6B, the Deputy Public Realm Manager report.
Previous thing.
I'll do a small intro before you start. So can I refer members to a comms update that went out from myself back on the 14th of May that is on page 18 at the reverse of the documentation, which gave a kind of broad update about where we are in regard to a number of public realm issues. I guess Jonathan, you're going to kind of give an update on some of those issues about.
Yes, yeah, I've already done some of them, which was the Eldon Road, and also the planters. The other thing to say is we've got 4 3-tier planters that have been already planted. That they were planted last week. We've got the plants for them a bit early. Machinery, we've got 4 steel strimmers, we've got 4 steel hedge cutters and 4 steel blowers. There's a slight delay with the hand mowers because they were delivered and they were powered dry, which wasn't what was requested by the staff. So we're in the process of getting them changed over so that they're push mowers. And the reason for that is they're more controllable in between the grades without causing the bumps. When you press the levers, it tends to shoot off and you buff into the, which is not what you want to do in a cemetery really, is damage any grave monuments or anything else. So that was the request from the guys that they wanted that. Yeah, we've obviously we've got the trailer that's come now, and most of the other stuff, the 4-in-1 bucket and various other items are all there, pallet lift for the tractor, and they're all in situ at 11 Eldon Road. The vehicles that we've ordered ourselves, we've had a little bit of a hiccup with. The one Kubota mini truck, that's been ordered through George Brown's, and that's been part exchanged with our old one to sort of give us a bit of a, you know, a price comparison. We did that with all three people that quoted on price for that. So Philip and I reviewed all the vehicle quotes, and we went with the best price really, which wasn't very much in it. But the Isuzu trucks themselves, we've had a little bit of a problem with the leasing. Yeah.
The company concerned are not used to dealing with the public sector, and their experience is different to what I would expect. So these are rent agreements, leasing agreements. We're not purchasing anything, and they require financial analysis of individual officers of the council. This is not officers of the council purchasing anything, it's the corporate body not purchasing, leasing an arrangement. So I don't think it's appropriate for individual officers to have their credit scores to be looked at or whatever else. So we put that message back to them, and we're waiting for some sorts of middle ground about what they can do.
I should know tomorrow. That's what the gentleman at Oliver's has said to me tonight. That's that as such. The War Memorial beds, which we've looked at. Frank's had a look at the plans. You've seen them as well, haven't you, Madeline? I don't know if they've been further to anybody else. No, I'll get that to everybody. So, yeah, I mean,
Can I just say there, on that, I do suggest that we proceed with caution on the War Memorial thing.
yeah,
Because people get quite emotive, quite rightly, about that sort of thing. Councillor Russell.
Well, the Deputy Public Realm Manager did speak to me, and I made it clear that we should talk to the British Legion and make sure that they were happy, and that none of the planting, I don't think it will get in the way on Remembrance Sunday, but they need to be assured that it won't get in the way. And I'm sorry, but I haven't done any communication myself, because the manager asked me if I would send it round to other councillors. I haven't done anything, and I'd be appreciative if you could send it round to other councillors.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've been away and I haven't done what was asked.
and I have put here that, you know, that I'll be consulting British Legion and CBC to make sure everything's all right, and of course yourselves as well, you know, that you approve of it, and hopefully we can go ahead in the spring with that, if that's...
It's just worth reiterating, and I'd take on the chair's view connected to this. It is a very sensitive matter, and we need to handle it delicately. At the same time, it's a fantastic opportunity to take advantage of Jonathan and his team's expertise in making, you know, our green spaces as pleasant as they possibly can be for our community. And it just feels like there's something in the centre of town where we could actually make something even more pleasant than it currently is, bearing in mind about how much of our community kind of spend a lot of time there. They drink coffee, and especially with the nice weather we've got at the moment, it would be lovely to do something that's appropriate.
If I may, the really good thing was that Jonathan was talking about planting it with red planting, so that it was red for Remembrance Sunday, which I think is a lovely idea. not poppies, obviously, but planted with red.
Irrespective of the colours, that's the element I would use. You know, so
Yeah.
use relevant things. Yeah, the allotment works, they're a bit of a work in progress at the minute. No, but I'm trying to get road planings to fix all the roadways in there from various highways agencies, which usually have trouble getting, usually see big heaps of them stacked everywhere. At the minute, I'm waiting for people to come back to me. I've addressed that again today by emailing several people that I've had contact with, that Ringways and CBC Highways, and various other agencies. But hopefully we'll be able to get them for next to nothing. And it's an ideal element to be able to repair those mud roads, which that is all they are, but give them sort of a much firmer surface. And if we've got a few of them left over, we can keep topping up the various dents that are in there and make that a much better place to get between the two allotments is the main problem, and the second allotment site on the far side. As we went, that's it.
It's worth reiterating that we had a site visit with the representatives of the Allotment Association with the chair. And there's quite a lot of work that needs doing to make the road surfaces usable. And as Jonathan was saying, we're in the process of trying to sort that out. And I think that the Allotment Association were very happy that we were taking this so seriously and that we were trying to do something as quickly as we possibly could.
Yeah. They're very pleased about the positive reaction they're getting from the town council.
We had a further meeting this week with the chair of the Allotment Association. Just to give them an update about where we are and to listen to some more about their voices associated with this. Did you want to mention the waste composting?
Yeah, I've just got I'm meeting Johnny in Bay tomorrow regarding the composting area and how we build it, how we make it for them, what they exactly want, in specific. So that they've got, I think they wanted 3 different bays, didn't they, for this stuff. I think it's probably an easy fix, but it needs to be put in exactly the right place, and hence the meeting tomorrow.
And I think we were reminded by the Allotment Association that for them this is an issue that they've been waiting for a satisfactory conclusion on for a number of years. So we're committed to making it happen.
No, just in relation to the composting. I mean, we do have at least the last time I was along there, had a fairly large pile, for want of a better way of putting it, that may be recyclable, and but realistically, it needs tackling, I think. So, where does that fit within the plan? Is that part of this, or is it a separate project?
Right.
Is it a separate project? I mean, because it's basically an eyesore within the allotments that needs resolving. But I'm just wondering whether that forms part of this composting thing, or are we just going to take a hit on it and deal with it?
I think we see them as integral. So I recognise that needs to be sorted, and it does have some unusual items in it at the moment.
Yes, indeed.
Which need to be sorted. But once we've got those 3 larger areas, then I'm sure that we'll have a much tidier space for people. Yes.
Obviously, I've delivered the paper that you guys for the personnel. That's ongoing. Going back at the top there, the Rotary planting with them on Friday. Sorry.
No, I was just going to, if that's okay, just as you've mentioned it, I think it's probably appropriate just to have a 30-second update in regard to where we are with the conversation that we discussed at personnel in regard to potentially additional staff for the public realm team. There were 2 questions that members raised and left with me, which I'll briefly mention today, but also they need to be discussed more fully at council. Number 1 was how much does the council spend on overtime in a given year connected to public realm staff? And I'm happy to do that in open session. We spend between £9,000 and £10,000 a year on overtime for public realm staff. And number 2, I am working with our accountancy team to ensure that we have a proper projected outturn for the current financial year that will help inform members in regard to making a decision associated with this. But I hope with that initial bit of information that members will be generally supportive of what we're attempting to do for public realm.
Just on that point, will that be going to finance and general purposes before it goes to council?
It's an interesting question.
I've asked for it to be on the agenda, so hopefully, yes.
Thank you.
Nothing else for me with unless anybody's got anything they want to bring up, I haven't thought.
Okay.
On to the next item, Chair.
Thank you. So we come to item 6C.
So in part, Jonathan has updated you in regard to 6C and 6D, but we'll pick the bits that he hasn't talked to you about. Vehicles, I think we're fairly clear on. All the equipment, I think we're fairly clear on, aren't we? Signage of the allotments. Our intention now is to put some good signage. So this is very low cost options, but the allotment association are very keen. They wanted to do this for a number of years, and I think we're broadly supportive of that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Can I just interject at this moment something that came across our bows yesterday? That actually the road is not Kennel Farm Road anymore. It seems to be Hollyhock Way. Miraculous transformation as per Google Maps. I just leave that with you.
Sounds like a load of hollyhocks.
Two other things connected to the allotments, and both of them are significant. So, as you can imagine, our public town team are particularly busy at the moment. But one of the things that Jonathan is tasked with, and it's not straightforward, is to try to increase the number of allotments available to our community, conscious of quite a lengthy number of people who are waiting for allotments. And I think it's okay to say that. I think we're probably in the region of around about 70 people now waiting for allotments. We do have, as members will be aware, a legal responsibility connected to this to ensure that we make appropriate provision. We were on site looking at some potential options. Some of those options reflect onto the wildflower meadow there. We'll be looking at options about how we might safeguard the meadow, but at the same time increase the opportunity for varying size allotments. So that's a sensitive issue, but we do need to look at that. And I'm very pleased to say that the Allotment Association are very supportive of our intentions connected to this. Another thing that came up was members may be aware, or will be aware, that there was a grant application that was referred back to PLOS for effectively some safe storage for the Allotment Association and more broadly the people who use the allotment. So roughly about 34% of the people who use the allotment belong to the Allotment Association. There's another 7 people who belong to a kind of smaller group. And then they are trying to encourage the other allotment holders to join that community. There is nowhere safe and secure, and there is some petty theft going on. There is some vandalism that's going on, and there's some petty crime going on. So it would be nice to have some form of secure unit that was on site. Now, when they made an application for grant, you'll remember that they asked for approximately £1,400 for the erection of a temporary unit. Yep.
Container, a metal container.
Container, a metal, effectively a shipping container that had its windows put down. That is one option that is still there on the table. It may not be the most pleasant container to look at, but you could clad it and you might make it look appropriate. If it's nothing else, it's secure and it is relatively low cost. The council could give a grant connected to that. As an alternative, the council could consider an erection of a more semi-permanent wooden structure that would be purchased by the council, would be maintained by the council, but would be rented by the Allotment Association. So I offer that to the conversation.
Yeah, it was a very interesting conversation. I got the feeling that the metal container stuck on the allotment would not be particularly pleasing. And the idea of giving a grant to one association and that association may cease to exist at some point in the future could possibly be problematical. So my feeling is, it would probably be better if the council owned it. And really, it's just a matter for discussion at this stage. Councillor Grant Page, I think, was first.
So I think at some point we probably need to see a proposal and some detail on this, because there's probably consequences for where people will park their cars, how many allotment plots that might take up. So we're looking to make some space somewhere, but I presume a shed of some sort or a container would take up and be. So I think there's probably a decision to be made there more broadly about what our, assuming that we're not going to be making these decisions immediately, what that looks like in 3 months' time, so you get a view of this committee and some clear guidance on that. But it sounds like some very sensible conversations have taken place, dealing with issues which go back years, I suspect. Just jumping back to the signage, small thing, but we now have matching car parking signage with our website. I think because one of his head, so he knows what I'm going to say. We now sort of have this colour scheme and this professional branding and logo, which is starting to become just a little bit more common across the town from the services which we as a town council are providing. It would be nice to make sure that we can keep that signage at the allotments as in keeping with the existing signage that we have, particularly that of our car parks, given that that's now kind of where we're going.
I do agree. Our corporate image is very important indeed. Councillor Mark Foster.
A couple of things. I totally agree with that. I think we probably should need to make sure. I'm not sure that the members, in terms of the corporate theme and colours and fonts, etc., are aware exactly where we're going with it. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of the design guide is in relation to that, because clearly it's something that we should be doing. And if the website matches, the signage matches, and colours, etc., and we've got consistency, we can do the same thing on reports. So the whole thing ties together. But I haven't seen anything in relation to that. If others have, that's fine. But I'd be interested to see that to make the connection. But another thing in relation to the signage and the more importantly to do with the allotments themselves. I think we have the last time I looked, at least, we had a fairly convoluted set of numbering in terms of how the allotments are numbered. And it seems to me that there might be an opportunity to, if we're adding additional allotments to the site, that we take the opportunity to, perish the thought, renumber and make it so it's logical, so you could identify on a fairly logical map. Why waste time doing a map then that people can't make any sense of? So for me, I would not be doing that until we've renumbered it, or at least given the residents or the owners of the allotments some sort of indication that we're planning to change the number.
Okay, I have no Councillor Strawn, Councillor Pullinger. I'm not quite sure who was first. Councillor Pullinger.
Thank you. So in terms of the proposal for a building or container, I think I'm very much in favour that it remains a council asset, and it wouldn't be a grant that we give for an allotment association to own on our land effectively. I think it's much more straightforward from a leasing and or rental perspective than then owning something on our land. In terms of future allotment provisions, so absolutely in favour of us looking at options to increase the number of allotments on the current site. I think the thing I would add to that is we actually need to make sure we push for an area of allocated for allotments on the land east side, because with that many more houses, there's going to be an expectation of another increase in demand, and therefore we should really try to secure further allotment space there. And I just want to add a comment on what Councillor Foster said in regards to the signage and the brand. So I think it really happened by accident, to be honest. We definitely made positive decisions in terms of what was delegated to the website working group in terms of the colour scheme for the working group. The signage was done that matched that, but it wasn't sort of it certainly wasn't, as you know, a council decision or a deliberate we are shifting our image. It was just how it happened, but I think I do agree with what you say. I think it would be good to have some form of design guide for the council going forward. And I know that's another thing to add to a very long list, so it's probably not the top of that list, but it's certainly something for us to consider.
Can I just bring in the town clerk before you, Councillor Storey?
I totally agree with all of the comments from members in the sense of having a design guide and a corporate sense of identity. And as much as we say, it hasn't formally gone through council, I think the conversation with the website working group was good. I love the new colour scheme. I love the new parking colour scheme. Our depot will look the same. We've just assumed that that's going to be it, and we're going to get on and do it. I know that the chair's been involved in helping us design something for the depot as well as. So why not? I think it really does add something to our community.
Thank you. I'll be pleased to hear that. I could be very brief. I'd support the comments that have been made, particularly about the container, in the sense that I think it's essential that we retain control of it as a council. And if we can get more allotment spaces wherever, including in other locations within the town now that we are growing so much, I think that can only be a good thing, but all the comments make perfect sense.
I'd just like to add, before I add my comment, Councillor, after you, sir.
Thank you. So my only comment is on the security of said shed. So I think we should provide a shed, it should be a council asset. It's quite an isolated location. A worry a little bit that the wooden affair might be quite hard to secure. So although potentially less attractive, the steel container, I can imagine, would be more robust if people try to get inside.
Can I respond? That be okay? By coincidence, the chair of the Allotment Association has his own engineering company and is a qualified engineer. I think his comments to us were that if he couldn't help in the sense of supporting the design of something that was safe and secure, that actually he was doing something wrong for the last 30 or 40 years. So there's some expertise that we can take advantage of, and he, as an engineer, feels completely convinced that aesthetically a wooden shed would look better and would be secure.
Councillor Russell.
I'd like to raise a point about the security of our lease of the allotments, because Central Bedfordshire are doing a review of their assets at the moment that they're not yet ready to share with us. Surveyors have been seen on the site. They surveyed, obviously, for where the 236 houses are currently being built, and then they were surveying the allotment site. And we only have a lease of that land, and I think we need to be absolutely sure before we invest any more money in the site that that land is secure. And I think we need to talk to Central Beds about how long it is going to be secure for us to use as allotments. I hope that they will be very supportive. I'm very supportive of the concept of allotments. I want to see more in the town. I don't want to see us losing that site, but I think we need to have a strong conversation with Central Bedfordshire Council about that.
Sure. The point I was going to make about the wildfowl meadow is I was quite surprised to discover that there is no protection as such on the wildfowl meadow. So as far as I'm concerned, a quid pro quo would be that if we do allow some of this current area of wildflower meadow to be allotments, we also at the same time make sure that we protect what's the remaining part of the wildflower. So I have made that point, and that's something I would like to see as we proceed forward. Okay, any further comments on that item? If not, we will move on to play and recreation areas. That's
I'm about halfway through writing a full report on the play equipment, and I'll hope, well, I definitely will present a full report to the PLOS next meeting. We're already going to carry out some immediate actions at Brunel Drive where the play equipment is unsafe, and parts of it weren't to play area design. These have either been removed or marked as unsafe. My initial findings say that it's probably going to need quite a major investment in the play areas if we're to get them anywhere near to a style that we would like, and hopefully other people would like to come and see. Some of it is quite tired, old, some of the old Wicksteed equipment, and certainly one of the worst bits is the play area tiled surfaces, which have contracted and expanded with the different elements of the weather, and they've actually become quite stiff and hard. There's not hardly any shock absorption in them anymore, and you can see now that they're starting to spread apart with gaps in between the tiles, which is quite an expensive item to sort out in itself without anything else.
Just to add, I know that you and I have discussed this. Jonathan's made a very valid point in that whatever equipment members decide going forward when they've read his report and recommendations, we need to be very cognizant of the fact that we should be offering both fundamentally the young people within our community and families in our community who may have some degree of special educational need the opportunity to take advantage of play equipment in a safe way and an exciting way. And at the same time, we should also be cognizant of some degree, and I'm not sure what degree, of adult-related recreational type equipment that people can take advantage of at the same time. But I would reiterate what Jonathan said, and that is, you get a sense that there's a lot of what I would best describe as kind of 1970s, 80s style type play area equipment that we could certainly look at potentially investing in doing something much, much better. I've also encouraged Jonathan to look at other towns nearby, and some of the stuff that we've been looking at is I have to say quite amazing and so different than what we've currently got on offer. It will be really exciting, I think, for our community.
Councillor Mark.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we as a committee, we've been accepting some sort of a compromise. So we haven't funded play areas massively. We have made investment in some of the play areas. So it's not that we haven't done so, but we've been quite cautious over recent years. So we have upgraded some of them, but have had the mindset of, if it really is not beyond repair, but may not be in great condition, it's still usable. So why would we force ourselves to actually make changes? I think we've got to be mindful of the cost of the equipment, and maybe there's an option there as and when the review comes up, and what's there is that we consider whether there's a location that we concentrate on some locations to improve the equipment in some areas, and then move other equipment. So it's not just throwing out what we've got, because I think there is some of this equipment. I appreciate what you're saying around it being Wicksteed and etc. As long as it's in decent enough condition, there may be opportunities to use it around. So not just reject what we've got, but I have to say, yes, there is some investment, and you do require, and we do see around the town there are certainly with some of the newer play areas, there's some equipment that's really good. And I'm really pleased to hear, by the way, about the equipment that we're proposing or looking to do for people that either adults or children that perhaps haven't been able to take advantage of that, because it's really important that we do that.
Okay, I have Councillor Mark Knight, Councillor Duncan Strong, Councillor Madeline Russell, and Councillor Rob Bullinger. So we'll take them in that order. First.
Thank you. So following on the same theme that Councillor Mark started, I think we need to be quite strategic, so we can prioritise. And one way to do that, and all of this would be possible, would be to first understand the catchment area for each recreation area, which we should be able to plot on the map. But also, can we look at the demographic of that catchment area? Because in some of the older communities, families that have grown up, and there's been a recent census, understanding if there are the proportion of children or the proportion of potential parents on the estate might help us prioritise where we should be investing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Strong.
When taking into account all these points, it's not only existing play areas I think we need to be considering, but future ones that are coming on stream or will come on stream over the next few years with new developments. And in particular, the question I've got for the clerk is, I noticed we paid solicitors' fees in respect to PLOS Gardens according to the last council details of payments. Have I missed something, or where are we with regard to actually taking over Apollo Gardens, and apparently some money as well?
Yes. I think, Chair, I'd like to respond to that under exempt.
Okay, yes, please do.
Thank you.
Who's next?
Oh, sorry. Oh, I thought you were going to respond.
Under exempt.
Okay, under exempt. I beg your pardon. Right, okay. Councillor Ross.
There are several things. First of all, just because some of us are older in the community, we do have grandchildren who sometimes need to be entertained. And so, don't forget that. I wanted to say that when we're doing play areas, when we're organising play areas, we need to think about the slightly older children as well. And what we seem to inherit, and this is part of the policy that central beds have got, we get these new developments and we get some of these silly little play areas that are only suitable for sort of 3 and 4 year olds. And as soon as mum's got 2 kids and one of them's 5, 6, 7, they're useless because we need, you know, all ages need to be entertained. So I'm very keen that we try to make sure that new play areas are properly designed and designed in the way that we want them for our town and not some sort of off the shelf, because that's what the leisure people in central beds always put into a section 106, because we do have some input into what goes into those. I know there have been discussions in the past between this council and Central Bedfordshire about what goes into play areas. And I think we need to be more assertive and make sure that we get the right play areas and not necessarily 2 or 3 tiny little pockets. Like I'm familiar with the one in Poppy Field, for instance, that's never used by anybody. And we need to have a bigger area that is suitable for a family rather than for just one little toddler or something. So I think we need to be a bit cleverer about the new play areas as well as sorting out the existing play areas.
I'd just like to say I would love to be involved with before the developers get really going with it, because then you've got a chat. That's the point where you can make a difference. Having worked on new developments for years, and we always made sure that we were involved in the development stage of the play areas that were going in as well. Because if you're not, then you get what you're given, and that's not really a very good situation to be in, from my view. Sorry,
Councillor Pullinger.
Thank you. So a few points. First, I'd like to build a bit on what Councillor Knight said around being strategic, which I absolutely agree with, and the prioritisation. So I think we absolutely need to focus first on safety and making sure that our assets are safe for those people who are using them. And then I think we need to look at it as maybe a 3 to 5 year plan, certainly not something we can address all at once. And I think Councillor Foster made some very good points around the fact that, yes, it might not be great, but it is safe and it is usable. So then that isn't necessarily the priority to be replaced. We need to look at it more strategically and actually use our capital planning process effectively, so that we not only pay to install this equipment as a one-off now, but that we're actually provisioning and planning for the future for when we want to totally renew it all again in 20 years time or 10 years time, whatever. I don't know what the lifetime genuinely is for this equipment, but we should be planning for the renewal for all of our equipment on a cycle. In terms of the, I'm very pleased to hear that around the consideration of equipment for those with special needs, not just educational needs, but hopefully physical disabilities as well. And you can get wheelchair swings and all sorts of things these days, which are worth doing. And then I think the other thing, which is tied to the comments some other members have made around planning the new play areas when they come on board, but is well, 2 things really. One is to look into how we might be able to adopt some of those play areas that are already built for the new developments, but also actually consider having a policy effectively of this council, which is that we want to adopt any new play areas in any new developments in this town, and that we can proactively then, officers can then proactively go and have those conversations with developers as soon as we know these developments are coming, and try and get there first before we get a planning application or some form of plan which doesn't include us as a partner.
Okay. Councillor Mark Foster, and I believe Councillor Straw wants to come back.
I've got a couple of points to add in relation to what Councillor Russell was saying. It's particularly in relation to the mixed play type. What I do find is that as a parent of a 7 or 8 month old and a 4-year-old, that the equipment isn't universal. So you end up, as you quite rightly saying, you've got maybe you've got a slide that is suitable. The climbing frame is suitable for a 12-year-old, so she can't use that equipment, and so the equipment, but there isn't. It's almost as if there is not a connection between the stages. I know that's a policy, and I think when we because we did have involvement in the play equipment in Land East and sort of Kings region, so we were involved in that. But there was a quite clear policy on having different play areas dedicated to different age groups. But that, in a way, is sort of is not helpful. You want to have all play areas having an element of something. So if you've got a young child, they can go on a swing with the seats containing and then a small slide. So there's a small area, a bit like we have on in Kylands, where there is the older children's play area with a smaller bit nearby. And I think the other thing for me, a good example of an area that seems to work quite well is actually the new play area on the Land North of Potton Road, where for me that actually seems quite a good site. And it's also the fact that we've got the one green space as part of that development seems to work quite well. I think going back to the point about trying to join the two places together, I think actually works well. It's a separate conversation, obviously, but that area does feel really, really quite pleasant. And if we can encourage that in the other developments that come forward, so these small areas really, as Councillor Russell said, are really of no benefit directly. I mean, I think what ends up happening, the developers aren't keen to have them. They're there as a bit of a providing them because they feel that they should. I think we should be encouraging the bigger areas in one dedicated location rather than these small pockets, because that allows us to then have sort of variety. So very much around being at the centre of the conversation and not allowing us to be told what we're getting. And I think, to be fair, on Collins Crescent, we were involved in that. So the equipment was there. We knew what was coming, but I think we may not have really understood what it was. So it's knowing what CBC are proposing and actually being able to analyse it from a parent-grandparent point of view and go, actually, that doesn't make sense. You've got that slide going with that swing going with that roundabout. It doesn't make sense. Let's be very close to the detail. And I realise I'm labouring the point here, but it's one of those things that we need to get right, because we end up being stuck with this equipment unless we adopt it and then we can move it around. I think that's one of the things you'll do. We'll look at what we've got and then move things around in due course. No.
Thank you. You want to come back?
Yes, just to take the points raised by the last three councillors in particular on board. One of the difficulties we have is we're often getting planning applications on bigger developments, and we are not addressing, with great respect as a council, the issues surrounding the play areas. We're looking at roads, housing, density, shops, etc. But I think, in view of the fact that the council is liable to be taking over these in the longer term, I think we should be made much more specific in our views as a planning committee, for want of a better description, on those. But furthermore, I would hope that with the newfound working relationship that the town clerk is exercising with CBC, that we could have a greater input into the planning process before the planning applications are submitted, so that we can go forward to CBC and the planning, very much possibly a design guide for neighbourhood local plan, with the idea of what we actually would like to see out of the development, so that the recreation areas are of a size and in a location that would suit the town council and the town's benefit, rather than something that is put into place by the developers because they've got to provide a piece of green space and they and the central beds agree to the planners, and we end up not necessarily getting the best deal for the town. So if that could be taken on board possibly in the future, and also be highlighted if we should get a big planning application, and there will be one or two more coming to us shortly, I'm sure, that we actually address this area before it goes too far, we're presented with a fait accompli.
Okay, I do believe the town clerk was just to come back on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm very supportive and encouraged by what members have said. And there's 3 or 4 points I'd just stress. I think the first thing is we'll remember a conversation that we had very shortly a couple of weeks ago in regard to the opportunities for getting additional funding, not least capital match funding that's on the agenda. And I think we should take advantage of that. I totally agree that I think when we actually begin to look at the figures, they're going to be quite significant, and to make it affordable, we need to do it in a sensible way. And we need to look at the volumetrics that Councillor Knight and Councillor Pullinger was saying, and properly understand, just because something is where it is now, is it needed in the future, and might it be, you know what I mean? There needs to be something that informs that. There's equally something here around a better, more creative and thoughtful use of our reserves. And we need to understand our reserves much better than we currently do. And that's a job in hand, as it were. I equally think that there's something here around working much more effectively with our strategic partners. And as members have said, we want to make a positive statement. We're in the business of adopting these play areas. We want to be the people who look after them, because we've got a real strength of connection to our community. Yeah, and if anybody's going to do this in a proper way, in a very sensitive way, then it's going to be us. We're probably the most logical people to take on that role.
Absolutely. Okay. Councillor Russell.
Just a final point. I think that it's quite right that we need to have a policy to adopt these assets, but I think we should have a policy to adopt all community assets that are put in a new development, because we know the problems we've had when we haven't been able to adopt something yet. And I think we need to make it quite clear to both the planning authority and to any developers that we expect to take on board community assets to run them for our community. And the other thing I wanted to say was, I don't know where central beds are now, but certainly in the past, they've had a hierarchy of play areas from the very small to the bigger. I think there were 3 or 4 in this hierarchy, and it was the planning authority that was encouraging developers to provide these various different levels of play area. And I think we need to have a strategic discussion with central beds and find out whether they've still got this hierarchy. And if so, make it clear that that's not what we want in Biggleswade from the discussions that we've just had. So I think there's an issue there about where all this has come from in the past. And I think it's to do, I can't remember the jargon, but each of these.
I'm the same, I can't remember. I know there is some, and you can identify them just because in King's Reach it's exactly that. They're designed in that way.
Yeah, so I think we need to have a discussion with central beds about their hierarchy of play areas.
Okay.
Can I just make one final point? And
playtime is over. We're going to move on. Okay. 6F, tree survey.
Yeah, I've just took delivery of all the software for the tree survey. It's very interesting to look at it, because you can get each individual site, all the trees are mapped on it, all the varieties of trees. It's really interesting for me to look at. Probably wouldn't be interesting to everybody else, but it's lovely to see. Yeah, I mean, it's not, but also it's the condition reports on there, which is very, very important. And each individual tree has got a condition attached to it. Most of the trees are very, very good. There's some work that needs doing immediately on there, or within a month or 2 months or so, which is easily organised because it's all catalogued. But it's very interesting to see each site and how many trees are on there. It's the information that's on there is really, really good. If anyone wants to come and have a look, I'm quite willing to show people around it. It's a fantastic bit of kit.
Is that all right? I think what I would stress is that Jonathan is giving you a quick verbal update. That's all it is. There is a report to follow. Okay. So not only is there a report to follow, but if there's any tree huggers in the room, then you get the opportunity, and I'm sure that Jonathan will be very happy to show you the software, and you can see in person how we're going to use it to our advantage. Yeah, this is just a sense, and to be fair, It's only just come, hasn't it?
Yeah,
Only just got the data.
last Thursday?
Yeah.
Thursday, wasn't it? I mean, if we could do it, it would be nice to just, I don't know if we can, but maybe we could organise the next meeting and having it up on the screen.
That'd be great. Yeah.
So that we could move it and show people around the bit of kit. It really, for me, it's a wonderful bit of kit. I've worked with things like it before. This is better than what I've had previously, even at Cambridge, so.
We'll indulge you.
Councillor College.
Thank you, and I think I always like to see a new piece of technology, so I'd be quite keen to see it at some point. I think with the tree survey, I think it's really important that we do act on particularly the urgent items, and again use it to make sure we have a more strategic view to how we manage our tree assets, to make sure that hopefully they don't get to a state where they become dangerous, and that we actually are looking after them properly. One question I was wondering in terms of capability in terms of managing them. I assume there's some elements which we can manage with our own public realm team, and others where we're going to need professional tree surgeons. And how do we have a supplier, a food supplier who does that routinely for us, or do we put it out to tender or what have you?
So in answer to the question, Jonathan and I can answer the question. So you'll know from Grove Cemetery that we've recently been involved in managing the trees in there and talking to the community before we've done it. And they are now all safe. And I don't think from an aesthetic perspective, they look any worse for it. So that's a good piece of work that's been well managed by Jonathan. We do have some people who are trained to do some work on trees up to a certain meterage and with certain equipment. Beyond that, it needs to be a tree surgeon. And there's 2 or 3 tree surgeons that we generally use who are well known to us and trusted. And obviously we would get quotations from them. But I do think there's, I mean, you know this better than I, but certainly for some of our bigger trees, you do need a proper qualified tree surgeon to do that type of, it's the safe thing to do.
I mean, the good thing is that there's a highlight report on there for all the things that need doing within the next, you know, almost straight away. And then every single tree on there has got a plan for it. So it will say work required in 1 year, work required in 5 years. So there's an ongoing element that you've got to keep updated, you know, but that's fantastic because you just keep moving. You move that, you've got the assets there. Like you said, the tree is an asset. It provides a whole wildlife ecology with just one tree, sometimes for only specific varieties of insects and birds that live on it. So every one of those trees is an asset. Taking an individual out of that element, unless there's something drastically wrong with it, is something we should never do, of course. But unfortunately, we live in a world of improbables, and there are a lot of improbables with trees. But hopefully this stops the improbability and helps us manage the system, manage the trees that we've got perfectly well now.
Thanks.
Yeah.
In that case, we'll move on to 6G, Drove Road Cemetery and Chapel, an oral update from the Deputy Public Realm Manager and Town Clerk Chief Executive.
So
You said you were going to do this bit. You did say. I believe anyway.
So, I mean, there's 2 things. The simple thing first is like an extension of what I've already said. So I think we're very committed to maintaining Drove Road Cemetery even better than what we've done in the past. We're getting better equipment to enable us to do that. We're managing the graves in a systematic way. Yes. Yeah. And there's general improvement in that area. People think
It's had a little bit of a growth spurt, which has caught us out a little bit with all the different work that we're doing, but we'll be on top of it.
so. If anybody does have any spare time, please have a walk around and have a look and come back with some comments. We'll be pleased with what you say. That's the more straightforward statement, I think, out of the way. And now comes the less straightforward one, which I think is, and I'm just being factual with members here and realistic. There is a lot more work to be done in regard to the paper, in regard to the capital related aspects connected to that. As Councillor Punjab was saying, this is on my list of things to do. It's very high on my list of things to do. It's probably 5 or 6, but it's not number 1. So as it reaches closer to number one, I will get on and do that work. And I'll report back to you with some more options.
Okay, so moving on then to 6H. I think perhaps Helen?
Yes, that would be nice.
Can we bring in Helen?
Yeah, Helen's doing a review of the cemeteries policy at the moment.
Cemetery policy. So over to Helen Cowell. Thank you.
Yes, so I've recently updated the cemetery regulations. They last updated in 2008, and the main change is that, the main change is that the soil will now be responsible to, the undertakers will take away all the soil related to tenants. So I will circulate out the councillor's comment and then I'll send it to the undertakers.
So, I mean, I think that kind of mildly underplays the hard work that you've done, Helen, related to looking at a rather old policy. And as you say, we need to share it with members and get their feedback. But I mean, I think what you've said about the soil reiterates an ongoing problem that the council's had and recently dealt with. So, you know, we mustn't forget, and Jonathan keeps reminding me, you know, we moved 47 tons of soil, yeah, that had been accumulating there for quite a period of time. Yeah, and I have to say, you know, I'm not an expert in this area at all, but I hadn't realised that actually we, the council, are responsible for the excess soil that comes out, and the funeral director effectively puts back, you know, that which can easily go back. So we need to be careful that we don't get into a situation that we were before. As one example of the things we can do better. Yeah. Is there anything else that you would pick up from the policy that is strikingly different?
I know I'm speaking to Ryan and Jonathan that there have been cases of the undertakers leaving soil on plots that are already owned. So we're making sure that they will be placed on boxes or placed away from plots. So that's another thing that we've made clear in the regulations.
Okay. Anything else, Helen? In that case, Councillor Grant pays his question.
Is this a policy just for Stratton Way, or is it for Stratton Way and Drake Road? Okay, that makes sense. I presume council or this committee will approve it when it's ready. Perfect, good. That's excellent. It's nice to start looking at the policies rather than councillors doing it, which is pretty good. Thank you.
Councillor Straw.
Just a question on excess soil, because obviously there's less space to fill when the grave has been, the body is in the grave. But isn't there a settlement issue with regard to the time that the soil takes to settle once it's put back? So is there sufficient soil to be left there so that it all beds down appropriately, or is it that there needs, I think, to be some consideration, because I think there needs to be a certain amount of what would appear to be excess soil in the first instance left there to settle in, shall we say?
You are quite correct, but there is an element of the grave settled, and we probably should keep a small amount of soil there too, but certainly not 47.
But I
don't think we could ever manage to fill back.
That'd be a big grave.
47 tons. But no, I understand, you are correct. Absolutely.
So it's just, I think we just need to bear that in mind, that there needs to be.
The trouble is, when you disturb soil, it actually, the volume increases for some reason. I've never really been able to quite, you change its structure completely, and it becomes a bigger amount outside the grave than what's in there.
Councillor Pullinger, then Councillor Knight.
Yes, so my comment isn't directly linked to the policy, but it's related to the fees, and I know we do an annual review of fees, but I just thought it would be worth commenting now. And that when I was looking and doing a bit of informal benchmarking, shall we say, against some of the other towns in Bedfordshire, our fees seem to be significantly lower in relation to cemeteries than other towns in the area. And I think it's important that we review those and maybe bring them more in line with the market rate.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring in the town clerk before, councillor.
As Councillor Pullidge is aware, I mean, this is one of the important aspects of the revenue income optimisation report that we'll be bringing to council. And what I'm particularly pleased about, and it's by no means completed yet, is that we have put together, with the support of the admin staff, two audit families. A localised audit family, which constitutes the local 7 councils which are close to us, and then all councils in Bedfordshire, every single council in Bedfordshire, as part of that broader audit family. And we'll then look at the medians connected to that. So we'll get a proper sense about how we compare, not just ringing up our local council. Yeah, we'll get a proper sense of data.
Okay. Councillor Knight.
Actually, so Councillor Bullen, for raising the point on fees, which I could have raised, the other point I had was around the style and size of memorials. Are you satisfied that the memorials that we currently have in the Stratton Cemetery comply with the requirements for size and style, and is there a scope within this policy to consider whether those requirements are strict?
One point is that we do follow the restrictions on the size of memorials. However, for travellers, we do allow slightly larger memorials because of their conditions.
Is that a matter that we considered, perhaps?
Something that the paper should consider.
Okay.
Do we have any rules? Because obviously I haven't seen this policy yet. Do we have any rules on plastic flowers, for instance, on graves? Because when they've been left there in the sun for 6 months, they don't look very good.
Can I suggest we see the policy, and then I think that's probably the best way forward on that.
Yeah.
And then we obviously want that as a point. Plenty of time to read it in advance and pass comments at the time, if that's all right. Okay, so going back to... Thank you, Alan. Going back to 6H then, we're back to the Deputy Public Realm Manager to update on some things. The notice boards, the benches and the replacement of waste bins.
I've had a good look at all the benches in Stratton Way Cemetery. There's one that really needs replacing completely. It has no nameplate on it, so it's really up to us whether we put it back or not. But most of them could do with the benefit of a good rub down and a bit of tender loving care with some stain. That's what I would say. However, I know that the responsibility is generally, I believe, with the person that's got the nameplate on the bench. I'm not sure if I'm correct on that, but that's what I've interpreted. So, generally, they could do with a bit of looking after.
Okay, Councillor Mark Foster.
Those of us that attended the walkabout will understand my thoughts around the cemetery, and I hesitate to use the word cemetery because there's an element of Mickey taking going to happen. However, I think it's important that as part of the review that we do make sure that if we're going to do the benches that we replace like for like, and if there is no nameplate and there's no specific person that's dedicated to, that we take the opportunity to make sure that all of them are the same. And it's I just personally find it quite jarring if there's something that is different if we've not got the cemetery there, because if you can try and make it like a calm area, and that's one thing for me that I noticed, but I'm not sure, it may just be me, but I think it's important that we've got locations where odd benches are required around our assets. Maybe we can move them from the cemeteries, and suddenly we've got a complete set in one location, or we've got the random ones in one location rather than around the site. I think I just wanted to make the point here as well at this around the it's not on this agenda as such, but in terms of the access to the cemetery at the northern end, and those of us that have been down there, the obvious location for an entrance to the cemetery on the northern end is where we used to store the soil, which is clearly 47 tonnes of soil not being gives us the opportunity to use that. And that gives us the sort of the great view into the cemetery. And I think we should certainly be looking to try and explore that. And I appreciate there's sort of a difference in levels from the main pathway. I think there certainly is an opportunity there. For me, we should be doing that and closing off the other one. But I guess it's a separate conversation. But I think it does tie in with the location of the bins and the whole thing around the trees, etc. My thoughts.
Darren Clark wants to come back on this, and then Councillor Strawn.
So I just wanted to say that when I think about benches, I think about benches per se. I don't think about benches in the town centre and benches here and benches there. We have a number of areas that we need to maintain. Currently, we've done something good for the main town centre. They're all back in situ. There is a question that some of them might be better turned around and facing in a different direction. Councillor Knight, we haven't forgotten that. But I think there's clearly a need, and we need to work together with other colleagues about understanding that some of the cemetery areas, some of them are a little dilapidated, and we need to create ideas of how we might be able to do that. Actually, we have got some other benches on order, and it may be that a bit of creative thinking, we can just move certain excess to a different, better place.
Yeah, on the question of the benches, I think that it may be appropriate to make sure that something in the review of the cemetery policy on the benches, in particular if they've been donated to the town in memory of someone, we need a policy as to what is right when they get a bit tired, shall we say, and need a coat of varnish or whatever's needed. But I think that's essential that we actually have it clearly in the policy, so that if we do have a bench donated, that it's quite clear who the responsibility is going to be with, particularly if it's going in at no cost to the town council. I think it may well be one of those ones where it would be appropriate in the future that the council bore the cost, but that's something to be decided by the council. But I think it's important that we actually do have a clear policy on that, so it's everybody's absolutely certain as to what the obligations are on the donator and on the council.
Okay. Councillor Pullinger.
Thank you. A couple of our points have already been covered, but a few others. So regarding the signage, so I think one thing that's really important is that whatever's written on the signage aligns with our policy. And one specific example I can think of is the current policy actually says no dogs allowed in the cemetery, yet the signage as you come in implies dogs are allowed by just saying that dog waste isn't allowed in the cemetery, or no fouling, basically. So that implies dogs can go in as long as you pick up their mess. I think that's what it says. It's something along those lines. So we need to make sure that's aligned. It's one or the other, that they're allowed or they're not allowed. The other thing is, in terms of that, so we've got opening hours on the signs, but will it be our policy or operation or otherwise to lock the cemeteries at night? I know they get quite a lot of use in the evenings, in particular in this time of year, people wanting to visit graves during daylight hours, even if it's in the evening. So we need to be conscious of that. The grounds do get good. I have seen a lot of people in there using the benches, so it's really important that the benches are well maintained and looked after. And I agree with Councillor Strawn's point around making sure we're clear on what we do and don't do with those that have been dedicated, and maybe review how those are provided in terms of it's a dedicated bench they provide, but I think from a simplicity point of view, it's potentially better that we maintain them in the long term rather than relying on the relatives who in 5-10 years time may not be in a position or willing to do so. And the other point I was going to make was similar to Councillor Foster's point around the north entrance. It is in the wrong place at the moment. The ideal place is exactly where Councillor Foster says, and it's something I've often thought about when I've walked down there from Edward Peak School, and you get to the fence and you see the cemetery and a pile of mud. in the past, and then a little gate which you would hardly know was there on the corner coming from that direction. So yeah.
I mean, it's certainly my view that if a bench is in a state of disrepair and if it needs upkeep and we can't contact the relatives, then we just have to take it on. It's a bit like gravestone, really. The cemetery is part of our remit, and it has to be kept at a reasonable condition. Hopefully, you would get the people responsible to do it. If you can't, then I think it falls to us to do it. That's my view. Okay. Moving on then to Biggleswade Town Council owned sports areas. I asked for this to be put on the agenda. We did have a discussion at the neighbourhood plan meeting that the sports areas are not specifically covered and protected against anything. And I just wanted to have it put on the agenda so that we could discuss it and find the right way forward. I know the town clerk wants to say something about this.
I think probably it's best left the members to start the conversation.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that a council meeting or a meeting or other a month or two ago around sports areas. And I know particularly in London, there's an organisation that works with organisations that own sports pitches to effectively for them to be registered and for that organisation to dedicate the fact that they will remain sports pitches forever, essentially. And I think if there is an appropriate scheme that applies to this area or is a national scheme, that we should consider looking into signing up to such a scheme and to show our commitment to those sports facilities. And I think that it is one of the key things that we offer to our community is the sports areas and potentially other ones in the future as the developments get built. And I think it's really important that we demonstrate our commitment to that.
Councillor Foster.
Cliff Andrews joined us at a meeting couple of months ago. Green infrastructure plan, and am I right in saying that sort of pretty much covered that element? And there was an analysis of all of the green spaces within the town, and some of them were deemed to be assets, and some of them were deemed not to be. And I think there was some discussions around what went forward and what didn't. And an example that didn't was the lakes play area, for example. I think that one wasn't, and there was an argument around what's an asset and what isn't. And I think broadly we agreed with those, and there was something like 40 odd or something with it. Am I missing? I've got this slightly wrong. I'm sort of halfway there, but there's certainly was a discussion around it. Was it less than 40? But whatever number it was, we certainly had Cliff visit us and talk us through. I can't remember the exact detail, but there was some criteria around what the detail was, and that formed part of the neighbourhood plan detail. Yeah, you're going to correct me now, Madeline, so carry on.
Councillor Russell.
You're taking two different aspects, and what council
Always the way.
Picked up is for those areas that aren't going to be designated in the neighbourhood plan, because the neighbourhood plan can designate what are called local green spaces. But those local green spaces, the criteria for them are laid down by central government. And what BRCC did for us was to analyse all the green spaces that are important to local people against the criteria. And the ones that meet the criteria are going forward as local green spaces in the neighbourhood plan. There is an issue that there were a handful of green spaces there, and I can't remember them all, and there are others in the town. But the interesting thing was that most of the others in the town belong to the town council. So we are guardians of them, and it's up to us what happens to them. I have a slight concern with registering something with another organisation that is going to make sure that they remain as sports areas, in the sense that we don't know where we might be in a few years' time, in 20, 30, 40 years' time, and whether it will still be appropriate. And I don't know what the commitment would be to what you're talking about. So I think we should look at it, but I think we need to be a little bit careful. What we could do as a council is to have some sort of policy of our own, highlighting the areas that we own and saying for the foreseeable future, they will be used as whatever assets, whatever kind of assets they are for the community, to make some sort of commitment. But I just wouldn't like to see us to be, as a council, I won't be around to worry, but in 20 or 30 years' time, it might not be the right thing to have done.
That's strong.
I think actually the starting point, in my view, is first of all, we need to identify the assets which are sports areas, because we've got lots of green spaces, but not all of them are sports areas. So my personal reaction is, let's identify what are the sports areas. You can look at the Linsell Recreation Ground, the Second Meadow and places like that. But I think it will also be sensible to review what are other sports areas within the town, because I think it would be foolish of us to just go down the route of what we own when there are other sports facilities around. And I think we should be working with the community as a whole to work out what we need in the area. And that then comes into the neighbourhood local plan and what we're going to need on new big developments, whether there should be sports areas there. And that may well include not only green spaces, but indoor spaces as well, which I think it goes beyond just the green areas, because would a tennis court be classed as a green area, so to speak, in those terms? So I think the first point, in my view, is to actually list all the assets that are sporting areas in the town council control, and then possibly consider them in conjunction with other sports areas to see what the town has already, and then we can look at what we need and what facilities we've got. And it goes back rather like the play areas we were talking about on the new developments, what we should be seeking out of new developments in terms of sports facilities.
That's a fact.
I think we may be over-exaggerating the threat here, in that a lot of the local sports facilities are under our control. And I'm not hearing any noise from any councillor anywhere in Biggleswade to do anything other than put sports facilities there. So it's a bit of a straw man argument, and missing the point ever so slightly, in that we do have the neighbourhood plan, we do own a lot of these green spaces. I think probably the elephant in the room is that actually some of them are not where we would want them to be. Even if we accept that this is a sports facility, what we have there is 2 or 3 out of 10. And I'm thinking something like Stratton Way, a building alongside that, which I haven't ever seen used. Same with the Lakes Recreation Ground. So for me, step one is less about worrying, is it a football pitch, or will it ever be something else? Probably not. But how do we make good what we currently have? I think that's probably the priority, if there is one to be considered. But again, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Councillor, Town.
There is a connected issue here as we're talking about sports areas. When we talked about opening tennis off in Biggleswade, I think there was an assumption at the time that the members would have received the presentation. It was my expectation that you would receive the presentation, and you didn't. So we've taken the opportunity of reading on the desk a copy of the presentation. I know that the Zoom conversation didn't go as well as it might. I found it quite difficult to hear. I think there's something there, Chair, around engaging with the people who made that presentation to understand what the opportunities are, and to also understand whether or not the council is of a mind to properly manage its own resource and invest in its own resource and maximize its own resource in the belief that it can manage its own resource, or whether or not we should at least consider other commercial opportunities and potentially partnering with people who might have a much more specialist knowledge connected to the tennis arena, and how we can connect that to all sorts of elements of our community. But this is a first sense of what might be appropriate.
That's positive.
So I think, yes, I've only got this today, so I haven't looked through it in any great detail. And as it's interesting what I have managed to look at, and I think it's definitely something we need to consider with them. I think obviously we have got an unused building right next to the tennis courts, which I know they're talking in there about looking for a building potentially as part of a tennis club. offer. So maybe there's some synergies there. I know you mentioned earlier that there's a potential interest. I don't know if that's related or not. But clearly we need to maintain our sports assets, whether it's tennis courts. We've got the bowling green next door as well, which is there, and we've got an arrangement with the bowls club. And I think that is one of our sports areas with the 2 sports that are offered. And then there are the sports pitches as well, and then potentially in the future there'll be more things. So we know that so the 3G pitch, for example, is not likely to come to us because now looks it's going to be at the school, but there's certainly, as Land East is built, potential for more, and also the other the football club and whatever that lease from us. So we need to consider it holistically. But in terms of this specifically, I certainly think for a future agenda and for further discussions with them, we definitely ought to look at it seriously.
Anyone else on this? Councillor Fane?
I was just going to propose actually that we encourage the clerk to go and have a conversation with the team who put this together, because it was a difficult meeting to chair. Actually, it was difficult to hear, and we didn't have the presentation in front of us at the time. But I have flicked through this, and there's some interesting expertise in there from somebody who could help us get a little bit more out of something that we offer to our community. So I'd actually like to propose that. I think that'd be great help.
Okay. Councillor Straw.
I'll happily second that. But before going on, just as one other point, I've just had a very quick scan in the last 10 seconds or so of this, and they refer to local tennis clubs, and they're missing one. And that is the St Andrews Tennis Club, which is based in a certain political establishment down the road from here, which I don't know why that's been omitted, but it does give me a bit of concern that there is a local tennis club which isn't even mentioned in the provision of local tennis clubs. But certainly I think we need to hear more on this at another occasion. But it just gives me a question mark over the research that's being done when there is one club missing. And of course, we have our own tennis courts, which they have referred to, but no possible formal club there. So there needs to be a bit more work done on this, but I think it should come back to us as a whole.
Well, we have so Russell.
I was just going to say, obviously, I wasn't at the meeting last week, so I didn't hear any of what was said. But I don't like to receive a presentation which just says, "Many thanks, Mario and Fergus." Who on earth are they? What is their background? What can they do for Biggleswade? We need to know all of that before it comes back to council.
The previous slides tell you who they are. So,
oh, right, well,
but we've only received this today, but of course we can't comment on it.
Councillor
yeah, I mean, I think that there's certainly some value in this, and we should be discussing it. And I think it definitely needs to be an agenda item. It did highlight a couple of things around the maintenance of the asset. So if there's a safety issue that I'm sure we'll have taken care of if there is, and the existing tennis court, and it would be a shame if we let the assets deteriorate any further. So if there's something we need to do, it's certainly important to do that. But yeah, there's definitely some work that to be done with this. And I think, Grant, to be fair, you actually did quite a good job of managing that section of the meeting, considering the content that was available to you.
Okay, well, we have a resolution, I believe, from Councillor Fage. Would you just like to repeat it?
Basically, I'm proposing that we encourage the clerk to just almost set up a meeting, perhaps inviting yourself, Councillor, as chair, to explore what this gentleman and his team have to offer. Because worst case scenario is we learn a bit more about tennis that might give us some ideas of things we do on our own, or maybe we can partner with him. Who knows?
I believe it has been seconded. So all those in favour? Seems to be unanimous. Thank you. So we now move on to items for information, of which there are none. Public present, but we do now have some exempt items. Sorry, councillor Knight.
Yeah, I was going to say, we can have a quick exec session to receive an all update on the expression of interest on the road chapel that was discussed at the meeting.
And Apollo Gardens.
In that case, this part of the meeting is closed. Can we stop the recording, please? And we will go into the exempt session.